Welcome back to Protest Pulse, where we dive deep into historical figures and movements that have shaped our world. Today, we're tackling a subject that might challenge your perceptions and spark intense debate: the complex legacy of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi is often portrayed as a saintly figure, the father of Indian independence who freed his country from British rule through nonviolent resistance. But behind this polished image lies a more complex, controversial figure whose actions and beliefs have come under increasing scrutiny in recent years. Part 1: Early Life and Formative Years. Let's start at the beginning. Gandhi was born on October 2nd, 1869 in Porbandar, a coastal town in present-day Gujarat, India. He grew up in a relatively comfortable household, with his father serving as the chief minister of Porbandar state. His mother, a deeply religious woman, heavily influenced young Mohandas, instilling in him the Jain pacifist teachings of mutual tolerance and non-injury to living beings. At the age of 13, Gandhi was married to Kasturba Mukherjee, a practice common in India at the time. This arranged child marriage would later inform his views on marriage and sexuality, for better and for worse. In 1888, at the age of 18, Gandhi sailed to London to study law. This was a pivotal moment in his life, exposing him to Western culture, philosophy, and politics. It was here that he first read the Bhagavad Gita in English, a text that would profoundly shape his spiritual and political beliefs. Part 2: South Africa, the birth of an activist. After completing his law studies, Gandhi returned to India in 1891. However, his attempts to establish a law practice in Bombay failed, and in 1893, he accepted a one-year contract to work for an Indian firm in South Africa. This move to South Africa would prove transformative. It was here that Gandhi first experienced overt racial discrimination. On one infamous occasion, he was thrown off a train for refusing to move from the first-class compartment, despite having a valid ticket. This incident, among others, sparked his activism for Indian rights in South Africa. However, it's crucial to note that Gandhi's early activism in South Africa was primarily focused on the rights of Indians, not the broader struggle against racism. In fact, some of his writings from this period reveal deeply problematic views on race. Part 3: The controversial views of young Gandhi. During his time in South Africa, Gandhi expressed views that today we would rightly consider racist. He used derogatory terms like kafir to refer to native Africans and advocated for the segregation of Indians from black people. In one particularly troubling passage, he wrote that white people should be the predominating race in South Africa. Gandhi also supported the British during the Boer War and the Zulu Uprising, even helping to organize an Indian ambulance corps to aid the British. He viewed these conflicts as opportunities for Indians to prove their loyalty to the empire, hoping it would lead to better treatment. These views and actions have led some modern critics, particularly in Africa, to label Gandhi as a racist and a collaborator with colonial oppression. It's a stark contrast to the image of Gandhi as a universal champion of human rights. Part 4: The evolution of Gandhi's thinking. Supporters of Gandhi argue that his views evolved over time, pointing to his later statements supporting racial equality. Indeed, by the time he left South Africa in 1914, his philosophy of satyagraha, truth force, and nonviolent resistance had broadened to encompass a more universal vision of justice. However, critics argue that Gandhi never fully acknowledged or apologized for his earlier racist statements. This controversy highlights the complexity of historical figures and the danger of uncritical hero worship. Part 5: Return to India and the independence movement. Gandhi returned to India in 1915, and by 1920, he had become a leading figure in the Indian independence movement. He transformed the Indian National Congress from an elite organization to a mass movement, advocating for Swaraj, self-rule, and leading nationwide campaigns for various social causes and for achieving independence from British rule. Part 6: Nonviolence and its Controversies. Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolent resistance, inspired by Leo Tolstoy and Henry David Thoreau, became a powerful tool in the fight against British imperialism. His tactics included civil disobedience, hunger strikes, and economic boycotts. However, Gandhi's commitment to nonviolence sometimes led to controversial positions, particularly during World War II. He advised the British to surrender to Nazi Germany, believing that nonviolent resistance would be enough to stop the Nazi war machine. He even wrote an open letter to the British people in 1940, saying, "I would like you to lay down the arms you have as being useless for saving you or humanity. You will invite Herr Hitler and Signor Mussolini to take what they want of the countries you call your possessions. If these gentlemen choose to occupy your homes, you will vacate them. If they do not give you free passage out, you will allow yourselves, man, woman, and child, to be slaughtered, but you will refuse to owe allegiance to them." Even more controversially, he suggested that Jews should have offered themselves to the butcher's knife rather than resist the Nazis, arguing that such a sacrifice would have aroused the world and the people of Germany to Hitler's violence. These statements have been widely criticized as naive at best and morally bankrupt at worst. They raise difficult questions about the limits of nonviolent resistance in the face of genocidal aggression. Part 7, Personal Life and Controversial Practices. Now let's delve into one of the most controversial aspects of Gandhi's personal life, his celibacy experiments. At the age of 38, Gandhi took a vow of brahmacharya, or celibacy. This was partly motivated by his desire to purify himself, and partly by his belief that sexual desire was a barrier to spiritual and moral progress. However, in his later years, Gandhi began conducting what he called tests of his celibacy. These involved sleeping naked with young women, including his own grandniece Manu Gandhi, to prove he could resist sexual temptation. Gandhi was in his 70s at the time, and while the women were often in their late teens or early 20s. Gandhi defended these practices as spiritual exercises, but they were controversial even in his own time. Several of his close associates, including 2 of his grandsons, left his service in protest. From a modern perspective, these actions raise serious questions of consent and the potential for exploitation, regardless of Gandhi's stated intentions. Part 8, Views on Women's Rights and Sexuality. Gandhi's views on women's rights and sexuality were complex and often contradictory. On one hand, he advocated for women's education and their participation in public life, which was progressive for his time. He encouraged women to join the independence movement and spoke out against child marriage, despite having been married as a child himself. On the other hand, many of his views on gender and sexuality were deeply conservative and problematic by today's standards. He opposed birth control, arguing that women should resist their husbands' sexual advances to control population growth. He believed that sexual activity should only occur for procreation, viewing sexual pleasure as a form of indulgence that weakened the spirit. Perhaps most troublingly, Gandhi's views on sexual violence placed an undue burden on women. He suggested that women who were sexually assaulted had failed to use their moral strength to resist. In his words, "I have always held that it is physically impossible to violate a woman against her will. The outrage takes place only when she gives way to fear or does not realize her moral strength. If she cannot meet the assailant's physical might, her purity will give her the strength to die before he succeeds in violating her." This victim-blaming attitude, while sadly common in Gandhi's time, has had long-lasting and harmful effects on attitudes towards sexual violence in India and beyond. Part 9, Economic and Social Views. Gandhi's economic and social views were also a mix of progressive and conservative elements. He advocated for the rights of untouchables, whom he called Harijans or children of God, and worked to abolish untouchability. This stance was revolutionary in the context of India's rigid caste system. Economically, Gandhi promoted the concept of Swadeshi, or self-sufficiency. He encouraged the revival of cottage industries and advocated for a decentralized, village-based economy. While these ideas were aimed at reducing India's dependence on British imports and providing employment for the rural poor, critics argue that they were overly idealistic and could have hindered India's industrial development. Part 10, Legacy and Modern Controversies. In the decades following his assassination in 1948, Gandhi's legacy seemed secure. He was widely revered in India as the father of the nation, and his birthday became a national holiday. Internationally, he inspired civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela. However, in recent years, Gandhi's legacy has come under increasing scrutiny. Statues of Gandhi have been removed or vandalized in Ghana and South Africa, with critics citing his racist views. In India, right-wing Hindu nationalists have criticized Gandhi for being too conciliatory towards Muslims, while some Dalit, formerly untouchable, activists argue that his approach to caste was paternalistic and insufficient. Gandhi's grandson and biographer, Rajmohan Gandhi, has acknowledged his grandfather's racist beliefs in South Africa, though he argues that Gandhi's later statements on racial equality were progressive for his time. Other scholars, like Ramachandra Guha, argue that despite his flaws, Gandhi's overall impact on issues like women's rights in India was positive and far-reaching. Part 11. How do we remember Gandhi? So, how do we reconcile these conflicting images of Gandhi? Was he a saint or a sinner, a hero or a hypocrite? The answer, as is often the case with historical figures, is not simple. Gandhi undeniably played a crucial role in India's independence movement and inspired civil rights leaders around the world. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance has had a lasting impact on political activism globally. He challenged oppressive systems and was willing to sacrifice his freedom and safety for his beliefs. At the same time, we must acknowledge his problematic views and actions. His early racism, his troubling experiments with celibacy, and his sometimes harmful views on gender and sexuality cannot and should not be ignored. Perhaps the most productive approach is to view Gandhi as neither a saint nor a demon, but as a complex human being who, like all of us, was a product of his time and experiences. He achieved great things, but also made significant mistakes. By examining both his strengths and his weaknesses, we can learn valuable lessons about leadership, social change, and the dangers of uncritical hero worship. As we close this video, we invite you, our viewers, to reflect on this more nuanced view of Gandhi. How do we honor historical figures' achievements while also critically examining their failures? Can we learn from both their strengths and their weaknesses? How do we navigate the complex legacies of imperfect heroes? Remember, even the strongest might weaken, and the wisest might err. It's up to us to learn from history's complexities, to acknowledge the full humanity of our heroes and villains alike, and to strive to do better in our own lives and times. This is Protest Pulse, encouraging you to question, reflect, and engage with history's difficult truths. Until next time, stay curious, keep thinking critically, and never stop challenging your own assumptions.